Ever since the opening of the Anne Frank house, her story has been at the center of many books and movies. Even so, many people have questions about what it's really like to be in the middle of World War II. The Anne Frank Foundation has compiled the questions asked by children and young people all over the world during the past few years. And this video will take you through her experience firsthand with answers to some of these questions, such as, why did Hitler hate the Jews? It was Anne Frank's birthday. She was now 10 years old and allowed to invite 8 friends over. It was June 12, 1939, a sunny day in Amsterdam. Sane and Hannah were Anne's best friends. They had known each other since they were toddlers. Whenever the three of them were out on the street, people would say, "Look, there are Anne, Han, and San." Hannah and Sane were from Berlin in Germany. Anne was also from Germany, but she was born in Frankfurt am Main. Everyone got cake and lemonade and they brought presents for Anne. They played musical chairs and other games first, but because it was such a lovely day, they continued outside. Whoever won a game got a prize. Anne's father, Otto Frank, took that Monday afternoon off work, especially to be there with them. He took this photograph of Anne and her friends on a footpath in front of their house on Merwick Square. Otto Frank had his own business. He sold a substance used in making jam called pectin. When the party was over, the girls were all given a pot of jam to take home. A few days later, they were also given a print of the photograph to remember that lovely afternoon. Anne wrote on the back in her best handwriting, "Anne Frank's birthday party, June 12, 1939. 9 little girls in a row. This was Anne's last birthday before World War II. 3 of these girls would not survive the war because they were Jewish. Anne Frank was one of them." This is her story. Anne Frank was born on a warm spring day. Annelise Marie, born on June 12, 1929, 7:30 a.m. Her mother noted down in Anne's baby book. Anne was the second daughter of Otto Frank and Edith Frank Hollander. Her sister Margot was 3 years older. 2 days later, Margot came to visit them in the hospital with grandmother Frank. Margot is so delighted. Anne's mother wrote, "Mother and baby were permitted to go home at the end of June. The Frank family lived on one floor of a large house in a leafy suburb of Frankfurt am Main. Grandmother Frank also lived in Frankfurt, but in the city center. All of the neighborhood children were curious about the baby and came by to take a look at Anne. The Frank family also had a nanny named Kathy. Kathy noticed the 2 sisters were very different. Margot always looked like a little princess, while Anne could enjoy sitting on the balcony in a rain puddle. Kathy sometimes had to change Anne's clothes twice a day. While Anne's mother looked after the house and the children, Anne's father worked in his family's bank. The bank had been funded by Otto's father. The Frank family was German as well as Jewish and had a long history in Frankfurt. Distant ancestors had lived there as long ago as the 16th century. These were happy times. Otto and Edith were happy with their daughters. The family lived in a nice house and there were many children in the neighborhood to play with. However, Anne's world was a world in crisis. Germany had lost World War I, which lasted between 1914 to 1918. It had been agreed in the peace treaty of Versailles that Germany had to give up land to the victors and pay considerable reparations to other countries. Many Germans were bitter about this. They wanted to be out of this agreement. As a young man, Hitler lived in Vienna, Austria, where he heard many anti-Semitic ideas. He adopted these ideas. He also felt that Austrians actually belonged to the German people. During World War I, Hitler fought in the German army as an Austrian. Germany lost this war. Hitler blamed the Jews for this defeat. To make matters worse, the New York Stock Exchange plummeted at the end of October 1929, causing a global economic crisis. Stocks were suddenly completely worthless. Many people lost all their money. Germans were also hit hard by this. Millions of German citizens lost their jobs, had no more money, and lived in poverty. When things are going badly in any country, there are always people who blame others without any real justification. That also happened in Germany. Many Germans felt that the Jews were responsible for all of these problems, for losing the war and for the economic crisis. There were also a political party that blamed the Jews for the crisis, the National Socialist German Labor Party. The leader of this party was Adolf Hitler, whose supporters were known as Nazis. They hated the Jews. The party program stated that they would change if they came into power. Jews would no longer be considered German and would only be permitted to stay in Germany as foreign visitors. They would not be permitted to work as public officials or teachers. And if there were not enough food for everyone, the Jews and all foreigners would be deported from the country. The NSDAP also wanted to close national borders and stop admitting people who were not German. So why did Hitler hate the Jews? Adolf Hitler was not the first to hate and target Jews simply because of their religion, also known as anti-Semitism. For many centuries, Jews were a small minority in many countries and were blamed for all kinds of problems. This stirred up his anti-Semitic feelings even more. Around 1920, Adolf Hitler became the leader of the Nazi Party, just a small political party at the time. He wrote down his ideas for Germany in the book My Struggle. Hitler wanted to make Germany greater and more powerful than it had ever been before. He believed that the people of the Aryan race were more superior. The problems in Germany would be solved, Hitler believed, if all the Jews were removed from the country. In this way, he made the Jews into scapegoats. In this picture, you can see bystanders looking at a poster at a Berlin crossroad in the winter of 1932. The election poster had just been attached to the column because the stepladder is still there. The poster shows people looking back at the viewer in despair. The text reads, "Our last hope, Hitler." It's a poster for the presidential election of March 1932. Hitler and his party said that they were going to solve Germany's problems. They generated propaganda on the radio and at large mass meetings. In 1929, the Nazi Party was still small with few supporters, but 3 years later, the party won the elections. 1 in 3 voters voted for Hitler's party. The Nazis promised Germany a golden future in which the country would be great and powerful. Adolf Hitler became the leader of the German government at the end of January 1933. The Nazis had a kind of private army, the SA, or Storm Detachment. SA members wore a brown uniform and would march through the streets and sing battle songs indicating they hated Jews. There were many fierce street fights between SA members and their political opponents, the Communists and the Social Democrats. Hitler and the Nazis gradually turned Germany into a dictatorship. The Nazis threw thousands of political opponents in jail or imprisoned them in a concentration camp. Hundreds of them were murdered there. The first swastika flags, the flags of the Nazis, appeared in March 1933 on Frankfurt and Main City Hall. The swastika is an ancient religious symbol that you can also find on temples in India, for example. The Nazis adopted the symbol as an emblem for their party and displayed it everywhere, on flags, posters, uniforms, and even Christmas decorations. In his book, My Struggle, Hitler stated that the swastika represented the power of the Aryan race. The colors of the swastika flag, red, white, and black, refer to socialism, German nationalism, and the struggle between the Nazis and the undesirable groups of people, including the Jews. On April 1st, throughout Germany, SA members went into banks, shops, department stores, and law offices owned by Jews and Jewish doctors' surgeries. They tried to prevent customers there from entering these businesses. They carried cardboard signs which said, "German citizens, resist, do not buy from Jews." Hitler's supporters did not stop at this. That May, they burned thousands of books written by Jews and other writers whom they felt were un-German in Frankfurt and other German cities. These authors were no longer welcome in Nazi Germany, and freedom of expression no longer existed. From that summer on, all other political parties were banned, and there were only one party left, the Nazi Party. Otto and Edith wanted to leave. They felt threatened by Hitler and his supporters. Because of the economic crisis, the bank owned by the Frank family was not doing well either. With help from his brother-in-law, Erich Elias, Otto was able to start a business in the Netherlands. He would sell pectin, the substance used in making jam. Otto departed for Amsterdam in the summer of 1933 and started out with a small office in the center of the city. He knew Amsterdam a little bit because a branch of his family's bank had been set up there in 1924. Edith, Margot, and Anne remained in Germany a little bit longer. At the end of September, they went to stay with grandmother Hollander in Aachen. Edith traveled regularly from Aachen to Amsterdam to look for a house. In November, she found a suitable house in Merwiet Square in a newly built suburb in Amsterdam-Zuid. The house was smaller than the one in Frankfurt, but bright and warm. Uncle Julius and Walter brought Margot to Amsterdam shortly before Christmas. She started at her new school there on January 4th, 1934. Anne wanted to go with her sister, but had to stay with her grandmother a little bit longer. She was brought to Amsterdam in mid-February. Anne's life in a new country could finally begin. Just like Margot, Anne wanted to start school right away, but she was still too young. In April of 1934, she was finally allowed to go to kindergarten. Otto and Edith sent her to a Montessori school, where pupils were given plenty of freedom. They felt that this would be good for Anne. More Jewish families who had left Nazi Germany lived around Merwiet Square. Otto and Edith became friends with the Goslar family and the Lettermans from Berlin. Hans Goslar and Franz Letterman provided advice to Jews who wished to leave Nazi Germany, sell their business, or wanted to start a new business someplace else. Anne, Hannah Goslar, and Saint Letterman became friends. Hannah was with Anne at kindergarten. Saint was in the same school as Margot. Otto had to work hard to get his company going. Edith took care of the children and the housework, and just like in Frankfurt, the family had a maid. Edith kept in touch with their former neighbors in Frankfurt. She wrote that Otto would not take any rest and that he was looking thin and tired. She also said in her letters that Margot and Anne talked about their former neighbors and missed them very much. For Otto and Edith Frank, it was a relief to be out of Nazi Germany. They worried about family members who still lived there. Edith's mother and her brothers Julius and Walter. All of Otto's family members had already left. His brother Robert had moved to London. His brother Herbert lived in Paris, and his sister lived in Switzerland. Grandmother Frank had also lived there since 1933. The situation in Nazi Germany became increasingly difficult for Jews. Jewish civil servants and teachers were fired from their jobs. Everywhere were signs with the text, "Prohibited for Jews," at parks and swimming pools, for example. At access roads to cities and villages, signs or large banners were put up with messages like "Jews are not welcome here" or "Jews are not wanted here." Using the newspapers and radio, the Nazis kept pumping out the message that Jews were the misery of Germany. More and more Germans began to believe this hateful propaganda. In September of 1935, the Nazis went another step further. First, all citizens were required to state how many Jewish grandparents they had. Anyone with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents was considered fully Jewish. Anyone with 2 Jewish grandparents was someone who the Nazis described as half Jewish, and those with 1 Jewish grandparent were quarter Jewish. Then the Nazis adopted special laws. Jews and non-Jews were not allowed to have love relationships and thus were not permitted to marry. German Jews were discriminated against more and more. The Frank family was no longer able to visit their close relatives in Germany or Switzerland as often. It became more and more dangerous to travel through Nazi Germany. So naturally, Anne was very excited when she was allowed to accompany her father to their family in Switzerland at the end of 1937. She had a lot of fun with her cousin. He was an enthusiastic figure skater, and Anne decided she would also learn how to skate. In 1938, Margot and Anne went to stay with grandmother Hollander for the last time. Otto and Edith were having financial problems. The Opekda company was not running as well as they had hoped, and the threat from Nazi Germany was becoming ever more serious. Otto traveled to Britain a few times to see if he could start a business there, but that did not work out. Then he met Hermann van Pels, who had also left Nazi Germany with his family. Hermann knew everything about herbs and spices. With his business partner Johannes Kleiman, Otto Frank decided to start up a second company, Pectacon, which would concentrate on grinding and mixing and selling of herbs and spices. They employed Hermann van Pels. In Nazi Germany, the situation became even more grimmer. During the night of November 9th to 10th of 1938, the Nazis set hundreds of synagogues on fire and destroyed thousands of shops owned by Jews. More than 100 Jews were murdered, and as many as 30,000 Jewish men were arrested. Julius and Walter Hollander, Edith's brothers and aunts and Margot's uncles, were among them. Julius was released because he had fought for Germany in World War I. Walter, however, was sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. This night went down in history as the night of broken glass because of the broken window panes that lay everywhere on the streets. Julius and Otto tried to get Walter released. They achieved this in early December. Walter was given permission by the Dutch Alien Service to come to the Netherlands, and he was released. Walter ended up in a refugee camp in Amsterdam. He was not allowed to work and was obliged to pay for his accommodation. Refugees were under police supervision and not allowed to leave the camp without permission. Grandmother Hollander came to Amsterdam in March of 1939. She moved in with the Frank family. Julius managed to migrate to the United States via Amsterdam in April. Walter was able to follow him in December. They had to leave all of their possessions behind in Aachen and had been forced to give up their business in metals and would have to start all over again in America. They went to live in the vicinity of Boston. Walter found simple work in a cardboard factory, Julius in a leather factory. Anne celebrated her 10th birthday on June 12th. She had been living in the Netherlands for 6 years and was in 4th class of the Montessori school. The German army invaded Poland on September 1st of 1939. France and Britain had promised to support Poland if the country were to be attacked. They declared war on Nazi Germany but did not send any soldiers to Poland. Tensions increased when Nazi Germany also invaded Denmark and Norway in April of 1940. The Frank family followed the news on these war developments very closely. At the end of April of 1940, Margot wrote to her American pen pal, Betty Ann Wagner, "We listen to the radio a lot because it's a tense time. Because we share a border with Germany and we are a small country, we never feel safe." In the night of May 9th to 10th of 1940, the Frank family was woken by the sound of heavy explosions and aircraft. From their house, they could see the airport being bombed. The very thing they had feared the most was happening. The Netherlands was under attack by the German army. It was war. In Amsterdam, panic broke out among Jewish residents. In particular, those who had fled Germany knew all too well what the Nazis were capable of. They had seen it from up close. Some drove to the harbor and tried to get to Britain by boat. Very few succeeded. Others were so desperate that they committed suicide. They did not want to wait for the Nazis to come for them. After a few days, it became clear that the Dutch army was going to lose. The German army had modern weapons and was well trained. Queen Wilhelmina and her government fled to Britain. When German planes bombed the center of Rotterdam on May 14th, Dutch military leaders conceded. The Netherlands was occupied. The Nazis were now in control. After the German invasion, life went on as usual for the Frank family. Anne and Margot could go to school from May 20th, and nothing much seemed to have changed. However, Anne's birthday on June 12th was not celebrated because nobody was in the mood for it. They went to the beach a few times during the summer holidays. Then Anne started her last year at the primary school. The Nazi Germany attack on the Netherlands in May of 1940 was part of a huge plan of attack to defeat France. Just like it was in World War I, the Netherlands was neutral. The Netherlands did not choose to support Germany, but did not wish to support Britain and France either. Hitler did not care that the Netherlands was neutral. According to German army leaders, in order to be able to defeat France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg had to be conquered. In this way, the German army could avoid the strong French line of defense at the border between Germany and France. Once France was conquered, Hitler's plan was to launch an attack on Britain from the ports of Belgium and the Netherlands. But how did the Nazis know who was Jewish, you might ask? In January of 1941, all Jews were obliged to register with the authorities in the Netherlands. The Nazis had already established in race law who they considered to be Jewish. Anyone with at least one Jewish grandparent was obliged to buy a form from the municipal council and complete it. 160,000 Jews lived in the Netherlands. As many as 15,000 of these had previously escaped from Nazi Germany. This registration was organized by Dutch civil servants. In this way, the German occupier knew exactly who was Jewish in the spring of 1941. A large black J was stamped in 2 places on the identity documents of Jews. The Nazis also started to exclude Jews in the Netherlands, as they had already done in Germany. They implemented anti-Semitic measures. Jewish civil servants and public officials were fired from their jobs. Jews were no longer permitted membership in the Air Protection Squad, and the slaughtering of animals according to Jewish religious laws was forbidden. These first measures did not really affect Anne and her family. However, in October, all Jewish business owners were required to register with the occupying forces. Otto knew that this was the first step. His business would be taken from him. In Nazi Germany, Jews were no longer permitted to own businesses. Otto Frank came up with a solution. He asked his employees to take over the management of Opekta and Pektakon. They would formally become new directors, but they would naturally discuss all important issues with Otto. That winter, Anne had a new passion, figure skating. She wrote enthusiastically to her cousins in Switzerland that she had been given new skates and was taking lessons. I'm on the ice rink every free minute I have. I'm now taking regular figure skating lessons. I'm learning to waltz, jump, and everything to do with figure skating. Anne hoped to be as good a figure skater as her cousin Bernd, who was already performing in public. Otto and Edith were worried about the anti-Semitic measures, but they tried to hide this from Margot and Anne. In January of 1941, all Jews with at least one Jewish grandparent were required to register with the city council. They had to enter the following details on all forms: their name, address, age, place of birth, nationality, civil status, for example, married or divorced, and profession, as well as their religion, how many Jewish grandparents they had had, and, if applicable, their last place of residence in Germany. Now the Nazis knew exactly where Jews lived. By February, the atmosphere in Amsterdam was menacing. The first large razzia took place in the city center. German police arrested hundreds of Jewish men and took them away to Mauthausen concentration camp. Over the following year, many families would receive notification that their husbands or sons who had been taken away had died. Otto and Edith feared the worst. They called on an old college friend of Otto's named Nathan for help. He lived in the U.S. Otto and Edith wanted to escape the occupied Netherlands to America. Uncles Julius and Walter were also asked to help with this, but America would only accept a small number of refugees. In addition, they needed visas and permissions to leave the Netherlands. Arranging these things would take a lot of time and money. There was another razzia in June, this time in the district where the Frank family lived. Around 300 Jewish men were arrested and taken away, including friends and acquaintances of the Frank family. This took place on the 11th of June, the day before Anne's birthday. The birthday party was postponed because of the razzia and because grandmother Hollander was seriously ill. During that summer holiday, Anne was allowed to stay with her friend Saint Letterman for 2 weeks. Saint's parents had rented a holiday home in Bibergen. Anne wrote in a letter to her grandmother Frank that she slept a lot better in Bibergen. She was not disturbed by air raid alarms or the sound of anti-aircraft guns. In August, Otto and Edith received a letter from the Amsterdam Municipal Council. The Nazis had adopted a new rule. All Jewish schoolchildren were required to attend separate schools after the summer holiday. Margot and Anne had to say goodbye to their classmates and their teachers. There were already Jewish schools in Amsterdam, as well as Roman Catholic and Protestant ones. But in order to be able to suddenly accommodate almost 7,000 Jewish schoolchildren, new schools had to be set up. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft bombed ships belonging to the American Navy at Pearl Harbor. This meant war between Japan and the U.S. But because Japan and Nazi Germany were allies, Nazi Germany and the U.S. were at war now too. Borders were closed. Any hope that Anne's parents had for getting out of the Netherlands were now gone. Escaping had now become almost impossible. For the Frank family, 1942 had a sad beginning. Grandmother Hollander had already been ill for a long time and had died at the end of January. She was buried at the Jewish cemetery in Hoofddorp. Anne now had one grandparent left, her grandmother Frank, who lived in Switzerland. Anne occasionally wrote to her grandmother and other family members in Switzerland. She could not write everything she wanted in these letters as the post was being checked by the Nazis. In April of 1942, Anne wrote that she was afraid that she had forgotten everything she had learned about figure skating because she had not been able to do it for so long. What she did not say was that skating was actually forbidden to Jews. Anne's parents had given up their plans to flee. Johannes Kleiman came up with the idea to set up a hiding place and wait out the war in it. One section of Otto Frank's business premises, the annex at the back, was empty, and that seemed to be a suitable place. Otto and Edith agreed to go into hiding there with Herman van Pels and his family, as there was enough room for 2 families. They hoped the Nazis would not find them. Otto Frank, Herman van Pels, and Johannes Kleiman gradually set up the 2nd and 3rd floors of the annex. They had to be careful because no one was to notice these preparations. Hence, furniture, groceries, and other items belonging to the Frank family were moved to the hiding place via Johannes Clayman's apartment. This took place in the evenings and over the weekends. Otto asked the other office employees in his company if they could also help if the family had to go into hiding. This meant making sure they would have everything they needed to live. Otto's employees promised to do this despite knowing that the penalties for helping the Jews were extremely harsh. So, given these harsh circumstances, why didn't the Jews simply take off the Star of David, might you ask? The Nazis implemented the Star of David in Germany and in most of the occupied countries in Europe. All Jews in the Netherlands older than 6 years old were required to wear the star from May 3, 1942. They even had to buy those stars themselves, maximum 4 per person. Jews who were inspected on the street and were not wearing a star could be imprisoned for 6 months or be given a hefty fine of 1,000 guilders, or 6,500 in today's money in euros. The German and Dutch police could easily check if someone was Jewish because from May 1941, all Jews in the Netherlands had a letter J on their personal identity documents. In practice, Jews not wearing the star were arrested by the Nazis and immediately sent to Camp Westerbork. Anne turned 13 on Friday, June 12, 1942. She was given something she had wanted very badly and was allowed to choose herself, a diary. Anne was a little bit pampered this year because she has not been able to celebrate her 11th and 12th birthdays properly. She was given sweets, books, flowers, a game, and naturally special birthday cards from Switzerland. At school, Anne shared butter cookies with everyone, and at gym, she was allowed to choose the game. She chose volleyball. Unfortunately, she herself could not play because her arm was prone to dislocating at the shoulder. Anne invited her girlfriends back to her house after school to celebrate her birthday. After her birthday, Anne started to write in her diary with great enthusiasm. She briefly told her life story and described her classmates in a few sentences. She did not hold back. She really could not stand some of her classmates. At school, the conversations were mainly about the reports. Who would go on to the next class? Who would stay behind? Some boys would even take bets on it. Finally, on Friday, July 3rd, the day of reckoning arrived. All of the school children and teachers gathered in the Jewish concert hall. After music and serious speeches, the children got their reports. Anne was not dissatisfied. Algebra was the only subject in which she did poorly. Otherwise, she got 2 6s, satisfactory, 7 7s, more than satisfactory, and 2 8s, which are good. The summer holidays could begin. Then, on Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. Anne's mother opened the door and got a huge fright. It was a police officer. He handed her a card which stated that Margot had to register with the police. As soon as he was gone, Edith immediately went to her mainland house. Otto was not at home at that time. He was out visiting an acquaintance from Frankfurt. Did Margot really have to go to a horrible work camp alone? She was just 16 years old. Edith calmed Anne down. They were all prepared and would leave together the next day. Anne's father returned home at 5 that afternoon. When he heard the news, he immediately telephoned his employees to come over. Otto and Edith wanted to give them as many items as they could for the hiding place. The helpers came and went to the Frank family's house until late that night. Margot and Anne also gathered their things. Anne stuffed everything into her school bag. Her diary was the first thing, but also old letters, school books, hair curlers, handkerchiefs, and a comb. It was 11:30 by the time Anne went to bed. Where could this mysterious hiding place be? Exhausted, she fell fast asleep in her own bed